boys and girls. It's Teacher Katie here from the Walla Walla YMCA Child Development Department. And I thought it would be really fun, instead of me reading a book, having my daughter Addyson read a book. So here's Addyson, and a lot of you know her. And she, when she was a little girl, she loved the Mr. and Miss books. And so she's going to read Mr. Perfect. Are you ready, Addie?
Yeah.
Here we go, boys and girls.
So, Mr. Perfect. It was a perfect summer's day, and on this perfect summer's day, Mr. Perfect was looking more perfect than usual. Not a hair out of place.
Oh, let's have a look at that picture. Look at Mr. Perfect. Oh, boys and girls, it's my favorite color. It's blue. Excellent.
Mr. Perfect lived in a tip-top cottage, and on this perfect summer's day, his house was also looking even more perfect than usual. Not a curtain out of place.
Let's have a look at that house. How cool is that house? Wow.
I suppose you're wondering why Tip-Top Cottage was looking so perfect. I shall tell you. It was Mr. Perfect's birthday, and he was having a party. There was a knock at the door. "Perfect!" cried Mr. Perfect. Oh, wait.
Oh, so he must be peeking out of his window when he hears that knock at the door. Wow.
"How very kind of you," he said when he saw that all his guests had brought wonderful-looking presents. "Please do come in, and if nobody minds, we'll open the presents later." Nobody minded in the least. Well, almost nobody.
Oh, there's lots of the Mr. and Miss friends, look. Bringing all those presents.
"What's that?" roared Mr. Uppity. "I don't have time to waste, you know. You'd better make sure we don't get bored today. Do you think this upset Mr. Perfect?"
Mr. Uppity. He does not look happy, boys and girls.
He seems really mad. Of course not. Mr. Perfect had perfect manners, unlike rude Mr. Uppity. "Oh no, my dear Mr. Uppity, we shan't be bored today," he replied. "First of all, we shall dance."
Oh, dancing. We love
There's
dancing.
Mr. Perfect dancing.
Oh, and he's dancing so perfectly. No surprise there.
And everybody danced, even Mr. Uppity. But although he danced, Mr. Uppity couldn't manage a smile. See, there's Mr. Uppity, and he's frowning.
Let's have a look at everybody else who's not frowning. Look, they're smiling and having fun. Oh, Mr. Uppity.
Unfortunately, Mr. Clumsy, being his usual clumsy self, broke a pile of plates. Do you think this upset Mr. Perfect? Of course not. "Don't worry, Mr. Clumsy," said Mr. Perfect. And being the perfect person he was, and not in the least bit clumsy, he produced a whole lot more plates. Oh no, there's Mr. Clumsy falling over the plates.
Looks like he broke them too, Addie.
Made of cardboard. There's some cardboard plates that
Cardboard plates.
Mr. Perfect brought out.
Perfect.
Then he brought in a cake. It was huge. It looked wonderful. It smelled terrific. And there's Mr. Perfect's cake. And it looks very perfect.
It does.
And Mr. Greedy thought it tasted delicious. He gobbled up the whole cake in 3 seconds flat. There wasn't a crumb left for anybody else. Do you think this upset Mr. Perfect? There's Mr. Greedy.
Look, and so he gobbled the whole thing up. Mr. Greedy.
Of course not. Being perfect, he had already guessed what would happen. Quickly, he brought out lots of small cakes. There were plenty for everybody, even Mr. Perfect, but as he was not greedy, he only ate one. One cake was just perfect for him. There's Mr. Perfect bringing out the cakes.
A selection this time. Oh, they look yummy. Enough for everybody.
Once everything had been eaten, Mr. Perfect opened his presents. He said as many thank yous as there were presents. Well, not quite. What about my present? Cried Mr. Mean. Mr. Mean's parcel was so small that Mr. Perfect had not seen it. Mr. Perfect opened the tiny parcel wrapped in newspaper. See, there's Mr. Mean's gift to Mr. Perfect. It's so tiny. Oh, Mr. Mean, said Mr. Perfect. You've given me a lump of coal. How kind of you. It's delightful. If I'd known, I'd only have given him half a lump, grumbled Mr. Mean. There's Mr. Perfect holding his lump of coal he got from Mr. Mean. That's it! I've had enough, cried Mr. Uppity suddenly. I'm fed up with you, Mr. Perfect, and do you know why? I'll tell you. I have discovered that there is a most enormous, unbearable, exasperating fault with you. Would you be so kind as to tell me what that might be? Asked Mr. Perfect as politely as ever. Don't you understand? Cried Mr. Uppity. Your fault is... Oh no, there's Mr. Uppity yelling at Mr. Perfect. Your fault is that you have no faults. And that is the end of the book.
How funny. So that's why Mr. Uppity was probably mad in the first place. He's kind of fed up that Mr. Perfect has no faults, because boys and girls, we all have faults. Nobody is perfect. That's part of life. Thanks, Addison. See you soon, boys and girls.